Sometimes we want to return a value from a task. For example, we may call the Twitter API to get the latest tweets for a given user. That's when we use the callable interface. Now, if you look at the signature of the submit method, you can see that this method is overloaded. So far, we've been passing a runnable object to this method, but we can also pass a callable object. This callable is an interface very similar to the runnable interface, but this interface represents a task that returns a value. So if you scroll down, you can see this method has a single abstract method called call. This is similar to the run method of the runnable interface, but instead of returning void, it returns v, where v is the generic type parameter here. So if we return a value in the body of this lambda, now this lambda matches a method with no parameters that returns a value. That is our call method here. So this lambda expression that we have passed here represents a callable object. Now we store the result in a variable called future. Let's look at the type of this variable. That is a future of integer. This future is an interface that represents the future result of an operation that will complete in the future. It may complete in 500 milliseconds or 2 seconds or 5 seconds, sometime in the future. So the result of this operation is not going to be calculated immediately using the CPU. So with this future object, we can get the future result of an operation, okay? Now, to make this demo more interesting, let's simulate a long-running operation. So in this package, the executors package, I'm going to add a new class called long task. In this class, we're going to add a public static method, simulate. And here we want to put the current thread to sleep for 3 seconds. So thread to sleep for 3 seconds. Now let's handle the interrupted exception. Now back in our demo class, in this task, instead of printing the name of the current thread, I'm going to call longtask.simulate. So we are simulating an operation that's going to take 3 seconds. Let's say we're going to call the Twitter API to get the latest tweets for a user. Now, eventually this task is going to return a value, in this case 1. Now, when we call the submit method is going to return immediately. So it's not going to wait for 3 seconds. It's going to immediately return a future object. With this future object, we can get the result of this operation. So this object has a bunch of useful methods. Get, we can use this to get the value of this operation. Like get is overloaded. With this version, we can pass a timeout. So if that operation is going to take so long, perhaps we don't want to wait forever. We want a timeout in, let's say, 2 seconds. We can also call the get method without a timeout value. We have cancel for canceling an operation. We have is canceled. With this, we can check to see if this operation is canceled, and is done, which tells us if this operation is complete or not. So I told you that this submit method is going to return immediately. So here we can do some more work. Let's say do more work. And at some point, we really need the result of this operation. That is when we call the get method. Now this method is going to block the current thread and have it wait until the result of this operation is ready. Eventually, it's going to return a value. In this case, it's going to return an integer because our task returns an integer. So let's store the result over here. Take a look. The type of this variable is integer, okay? Now here we need to handle a couple of exceptions. One of them is interrupted exception that you have seen before. The other is execution exception. And this happens if this task throws an exception. So we can cache this exception over here and do something with it. Now in this demo, I'm going to simplify this code and combine these catch blocks. So vertical bar, execution, exception. Now let's get rid of the second catch block. So when I run this program, you will see that we immediately see this message on the terminal because the submit method is not going to wait for the completion of this task. It's going to start this task on a separate thread. And eventually, when we call future.get, we have to wait for this operation to complete. Now we get the result and print it. Let's see what happens. So we see do more work. Now 1, 2, 3 seconds later, the result is ready and we print it over here.